So the qualified charitable distribution, it's part of the law, basically meaning that you have the ability from a tax-deferred asset to send money directly to a qualified charity, and that doesn't show up on your income.
So it's not a deductible expense or a deductible item on the tax return, but it never shows up on the tax return. So it's actually better than getting the money and then deducting it, giving it to charity.
Exactly.
Starting your route to retirement.
Welcome to the Guided Retirement Show. I'm your host, Dean Barber. I've got with me today Will Doty. He's a certified financial planner professional, and we are going to be talking about something that is going to apply to just about anyone with IRA or 401k assets. If you live long enough, you're going to learn the term RMD. It stands for Required Minimum Distribution. Here to discuss the impact on your retirement plan and really introduce some very exciting planning strategies that can make a huge difference in your retirement. Please enjoy my conversation with Will Doty, Certified Financial Planner Professional. Before we hop into today's episode, I want to remind our listeners and viewers that you can access the same financial planning tools we use for our own clients on your own time and all from the comfort of your own home. All you need to do is visit the link in the show notes and click the Start Planning button. From there, you can start building your retirement plan, no cost, no obligation. All right, we're here today with Will Doty. He's a certified financial planner professional here at Barber Financial Group. Will, thanks for being part of the Guided Retirement Show.
Thanks for having me, Dean.
Absolutely. Today, we're going to talk about something that anybody who lives long enough and has money in some sort of a retirement account, be it a 401k, a 403b, an IRA, etc., this is going to impact them. It's something called an RMD, and the government loves to use acronyms, and it actually stands for a required minimum distribution. I like to think of it as the government's way of saying, Will, I'm tired of waiting on you to die to start getting my share of your IRA. You need to start taking some money out every year so I can get a little bit.
That's exactly right.
So let's first talk about the RMD, and let's talk about it in terms, Will, of how much has to come out and when do you have to start?
Okay. So as far as start, prior to the Secure Act, it was 70.5. Again, got to thank our government for weird, kooky rules. Now it is start age of 72. And obviously we have the Secure Act 2.0 is kind of bouncing around in Congress, so that might change again. But that's the start date as of right now. So age 72, you have to start taking it.
Well, and it is actually April 1st of the year following the year that you turn 72. But if you do that, then you have to take 2 RMDs in that calendar year.
Correct.
Right? So depending upon the overall tax status and what the planning looks like, you may want to choose to push that first RMD into that year following the year that you turn 72, where you have to take that first one by April 1st, and then you have to take another one by the end of the year of that year. So here's what would happen. This is a good example. So your age 72 RMD is actually 3.65% of the December 31st balance of the prior year. Okay. Right. So we could calculate that, and let's just say we had $1 million. So that'd be $36,500 would be my required minimum distribution. But if I elected to push that into April 1st of the following year, I would have to take out $36,500. And then later in the year, I've got a 3.77% RMD or $37,700. So then the question is, if I push that much income into the next year, is there a good reason to do that? Was I still working at 72 and I wouldn't be working at 73? But that rule is a quirky one, but I think it's important for people to understand it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And then it just comes down to your personal situation, right? I mean, like what you said, I mean, maybe you got an inheritance or something at age 72 that was impacting your taxes that year, so you want to delay. I mean, there's a lot of different variables that could come into play.
Right. I just want people to understand that don't just fall into this, it's 72, I got to take it this year, because you don't necessarily have to, but if you don't do it that year, you've got to do 2 the following year.
Correct.
And so sometimes that may make sense. I've seen it in the past where that was a good planning strategy.
Yep.
Saved us some money on taxes, and that's kind of the idea here.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Way back when, our good friend Ed Slott, he wrote a book called The Retirement Savings Time Bomb and How to Defuse It. And of course, Ed's been a guest here on the Guided Retirement Show multiple times.
Yep.
And if you search for Ed Slott and the Guided Retirement Show, you'll see some very entertaining videos. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're just listening on the podcast, you can go out and catch those. But Ed is considered to be the leading expert on IRAs in the country. And of course, what he was talking about in the Retirement Savings Time Bomb was the massive amounts of money that were being accumulated in qualified retirement plans that were going to be being forced out at a given age. And I don't think people really understand how much that required minimum distribution is really going to be. But when you're doing a financial plan as a certified financial planner, that's one of the first things you're looking at is how much is in a qualified plan and what are going to be the tax ramifications when we start taking that out.
That's exactly right. We want to look at it and understand what those long-term impacts are because of that required minimum distribution. And what we find a lot of times, unfortunately, the baby boomers, they're kind of lied to. They're all told, just put it tax deferred today, save your money, and you're going to be in a lower tax rate when you retire. And we're finding that it's not necessarily the case for a lot of people.
Right. If you did a good job of saving, you're not going to be in a lower tax rate.
No, you are not.
So you actually had put together a case study, and hopefully we can do this thing justice without visual prompts. So
sure.
Let's talk about this. And what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about a couple that is age 62. And by the way, this is not a real person. Now, this is kind of indicative of what we see often when people are heading into retirement. It's a fairly common scenario.
It is.
So go ahead and lay out the scenario for us, Will.
Yeah, so we got our sample clients, Sam and Samantha, currently age 62, planning on retiring here at age 65, and have already made a decision to go ahead and take Social Security at 70, and we had a planning age out to 95.
Okay.
So, good long life.
Yeah,
right?
That would be fun.
Yeah.
As long as you stay in good health, right?
Yes, health is important. As far as their savings, they have about $1.5 million tax deferred.
So that would be like IRA, 401k type.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Kind of mixed between both spouses. About $250,000 after tax money, and just a little bit in Roth already. So they started doing the Roth, which was great. No debt, so their expenses aren't outlandish by any means. They're spending a little over $60,000. Plus, we have to account for healthcare expenses because they're not right now, because obviously that comes out of their paycheck. They also have a goal to go and travel about $15,000 per year, up until about age 80. And they also are charitably inclined, so they're giving away about $10,000 a year.
Okay.
So a lot to look at for them, and looking at those forward-looking projections. The great news is when we put their plan together, the plan probability came out at 90%. So that's great. They can go do what they want to do. No worries. But obviously, as we're looking at it, we're seeing, they have that savings time bomb issue coming up in the future.
So let's back up for just a minute, Will. And for people that aren't familiar with what you're saying as a 90% probability of success, let's talk about what that means.
Sure. So we use sophisticated planning software. We got a couple different tools that we utilize, but what they're doing behind the scenes is running what is referred to as Monte Carlo simulation. So what that means is it's just going through and mixing and matching the different sequences of return in the portfolio, because that's one huge variable we can't control, right? What is the market going to do? It does this 1,000 different times to get this overall probability. So when we say 90% probability, that means 900 out of the 1,000 trials, they die and still have money left over.
And they were able to spend the way they wanted to spend and leave the legacy they wanted to leave.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
So that 10 or that 100 times out of the 1,000, it doesn't mean that they necessarily run out of money. It just means that they may need to adjust their spending, or there could be some trade-offs that might occur in the future.
Exactly.
All right. So 90% probability of success, you and I consider that to be a good plan where, hey, you get to a 90% probability of success using Monte Carlo, you're good to go retire, have fun, live your life, and do the things you want to do.
Exactly.
All right. Now, you threw in some planning opportunities here, and these planning opportunities surround the required minimum distribution. So talk about what you did.
They do. So ran a couple different probabilities here. Looked at some different strategies. We looked at things like Roth conversions, donor advised funds, another technique called qualified charitable distributions, otherwise known as QCDs. So when we looked at it, we just kind of ran some one-offs. First off, looked at the whole play with the charity because, again, they are giving away $10,000 a year. So looked at the donor advised fund, which is where we're just taking a strategy where we take a multiple years approach worth of charity, put it all into a fund called a donor advised fund in one single year. So they get a big write-off. And therefore, on the backside, that also gives us the opportunity that year to do a larger Roth conversion.
Okay.
Which again, Roth conversion is just moving money from tax deferred to Roth. And obviously we got to pay Uncle Sam in that year. And then,
but if you did a bigger donor advised fund, you could actually convert that a bigger chunk of Roth without having much of a tax implication.
Exactly. And that's why we look at it.
Okay.
Now, obviously, donor advised funds aren't for everybody. So that's something you need to talk to your planner about and whether or not it makes sense.
And let's talk about what the QCD is real quick.
Yeah. So the qualified charitable distribution, it's part of the law, basically meaning that you have the ability from a tax deferred asset to send money directly to a qualified charity, and that doesn't show up on your income.
Right. So it's not a deductible expense or a deductible item on the tax return, but it never shows up on the tax return. So it's actually better than getting the money and then deducting it, giving it to charity.
Exactly.
All right. Now let's make sure that people know that in order to do a QCD or a qualified charitable distribution, they left the age 70 and a half year in there. So you can start doing QCDs at 70 and a half. So anybody that is over the age of 70 and a half and is charitably inclined, I think anybody should be definitely looking at a QCD and giving the monies to charity directly from those IRAs. You can't give it from a 401k, but you can give it from IRAs.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the other caveat is, one, you have to be exactly 70 and a half or older.
Right.
So it's not just the year that you turn 70 and a half. You got to be exactly 70 and a half or older. And the money has to go directly from IRA custodian to the charity.
Right.
So it can't land in your wallet at any point in time, because that would then be a deductible contribution or charitable contribution, not a qualified charitable distribution.
Right. And the individual that's doing that QCD needs to make sure that they communicate that with their tax preparer, because nowhere on the 1099-R does it say that this money went directly to charity, this money went to you.
Correct. It's very important. Tell all of our clients, make sure you're getting the receipt from the charity.
Yeah. And that goes to your accountant. That way they can say this was a QCD.
Exactly.
All right. So you applied donor advised funds and QCDs to the same scenario. So just to recap, this couple is still wanting to spend a little over $60,000 a year plus healthcare. They're wanting to do some travel, about $15,000 a year, and they're giving $10,000 a year to charity. So you didn't change any of that. You didn't change any of the investment mix. All you did was say, and let's just do some QCDs and donor advised funds when that RMD, required minimum distribution, hits. And what did that do to the probability of success in this plan?
So it actually increased it. So it took them from a 90 all the way up to a 93, which was great to see. And it did come with a little bit of tax savings. So that's something else that we're looking at is, not only does it improve a client's probability, but what does it do on the back end? How does it change the mix of their assets when they pass away?
All right. So let's walk through that real quick. Let's back up to the current plan without the QCDs and the donor advised funds. Where did they wind up at the end of the plan?
So based upon projections, and again, just using average rates of return, they wind up with a little over $1 million after tax, about $2.2 million tax deferred, and about $370,000 in Roth.
Okay.
So when we went and we put in the donor advised fund and the qualified charitable distributions, they actually wind up with a little bit more after tax, because again, we weren't giving all this time out of that after tax bucket, and we switched it all over to tax deferred. And then they wound up with about another 2.2 in tax deferred and that same roughly 370 in Roth, because there was no impact based on those moves to the Roth bucket at all.
But they end up with $1,295,000. So they actually wind up with an estate that is roughly $300,000 more to their children, even after they gave the same amount to charity and spent the same amount through their lifetime.
Exactly.
Pretty good planning tool.
It's a very good planning tool.
All right. Now, you coupled that in another scenario with converting some of the IRA each year up to the top of the 12% tax bracket.
Correct.
And so you still, you're going to, and this one, you're not using QCDs or QCDs or donor advised funds, right? You're just saying, let's just do some conversions.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because we just want to understand the impact, right? Scientific method, change one thing and see how it turns out. So in the conversions, maxing out to the 12% bracket didn't have as big of an impact on the probability, but had a massive impact on how the money was left behind to the children, along with a huge tax savings. So it bumped us from a 90 to a 91, which that's great. Yeah. Extra percent.
It was an improvement.
But the difference is huge when we look at the projected ending balances. They wind up with nothing after tax, just barely over $1 million in tax deferred, and 2.6 in Roth.
And that 2.6 million in Roth is tax free when it goes to the next generation.
Exactly.
So you went from $370,000 in a Roth to $2.6 million in a Roth. You went from $2.2 million in tax deferred only down to $1 million. So the kids only have to pay taxes on the $1 million. And we'll get into how the RMDs for beneficiaries play in here. And you got $182,000 of tax savings.
Yeah, over the life of the plan.
Yeah.
It's massive.
That's a big deal.
That is. It's a huge deal.
Let's combine these two things together, Will, because this is where your combination of the donor advised funds, the QCDs, and doing Roth conversions all play together.
Yeah. So very interesting in the outcome. So it bumps their probability from the 90 up to the 93 again. Same thing. We wind up seeing zero after tax at the end. Now, because we were given from the tax deferred bucket, the after tax actually lasted much longer in that plan when I was looking through the actual data. And we ended up actually with 1.4 million tax deferred and that same 2.6 in Roth. So again, very powerful, but I think the most powerful part of it is the tax savings.
Up to almost $275,000.
Yes. That's massive.
Yeah. Now again, this is not a real person. This is not a real couple, but we see this kind of situation almost weekly as we have people come into us that are saying, hey, I'm getting ready to retire. I want to make sure I get a plan together. Imagine the difference. And I think this would be a cool scenario to run. I think this could maybe get some people excited. Well, okay, so if I can take my probability from 90 to 93, and you said 90 was good, does that mean I can spend more money?
If you want, that's something we can talk about.
You could, right?
Yeah.
So then maybe instead of a little over 60, maybe they could spend 70, maybe they could spend 75, maybe they could spend 80 in the first 10 or 15 years of their retirement and then reduce it back. There's all kinds of scenarios you can play around with, but these results I think are fascinating because they have nothing to do with the investing part of the overall plan, because you're assuming the same asset allocation across the board for all three of these scenarios. This is just a few different financial planning techniques applied to a pretty normal person's situation that shows, hey, either you can leave a larger estate or you can spend more money while you're here and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what's fascinating, as I was building out this sample plan, is same, all the other factors the same, but I reduced their tax deferred down to $1 million from the 1.5. And guess what? Conversions didn't make sense. It actually cost them more as opposed to having big tax savings. So again, a plan is not one size fits all. So just because a conversion works for one person doesn't mean it works for somebody else, right?
Right. So somebody shouldn't listen to this podcast and say, gosh, I should do a Roth conversion.
Exactly. They need to sit down with the planner and they need to understand how it impacts them long term.
Yeah, because if you haven't done that and you're just blindly doing Roth conversions because you're believing that over the long period of time you're just going to save a bunch of money in taxes, it's not always the case.
No, it's definitely not.
I'd say it comes into play. It's more than 50-50, but it's definitely not 100%.
No.
All right. Well, nice work on that. So
thank you.
Let's continue on with the RMDs and talk a little bit more about that. So as we talked about with required minimum distribution at the age of 72, your required minimum distribution that year is going to be 3.65% of the 1231 balance from the year before.
Yeah.
Right. By the time you get up to age 80, it's 4.95%. By the time you get to 85, it's 6.25%. And by the time you get to age 90, it's 8.2%. And obviously, the life expectancy tables from the government's uniform lifetime tables go all the way out to 120. But the goal is that they want you to get that money out. And the older you get, the faster they want that money to come out.
Correct.
And prior to this Secure Act, people used to be able to name their children or their grandchildren as beneficiaries to their IRAs, and those children or grandchildren could then stretch that IRA out over their lifetime, meaning that they don't have to take all the money out in a certain period of time. They just have to continue to take required minimum distributions, but it's not based on the deceased person's RMD table. There is now a single lifetime table for inherited IRAs. And that table hasn't changed, but what has changed is how people can now inherit our IRAs or 401ks, and how that new person who's inherited the money, how those RMDs are treated for them.
Right.
Okay, so the IRS really made this, well, it wasn't IRS, it was Congress. They came out with something called the Secure Act.
Yep.
And the Secure is an acronym, as everything else in government comes. It's called Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement. Okay.
Interesting.
Ed Slott says, if it says secure, you can guarantee yourself that there's nothing in there that makes your retirement more secure. It's something just the opposite. Right.
I would agree with that.
I think of that almost like the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed that has nothing to do with reducing inflation. In fact, it's probably going to cause more inflation. So under the Secure Act, people who are inheriting IRAs fall into one of three categories. You can either be a non-designated beneficiary or an NDB, or you can be a non-eligible designated beneficiary or an NEDB, or you can be an eligible designated beneficiary or an EDB. All right, so each one of those three types of beneficiaries is going to have a different rule on the RMDs from the IRAs or 401ks that they inherit.
Yeah, it's quite a mess.
It's a huge mess. It's a huge mess. So let's just go to non-designated beneficiaries. So non-designated beneficiaries are not people. They're an estate, a charity, or a non-qualifying trust, which means that they're a non-look-through trust. And if somebody dies before the required beginning date, which is again April 1st of the year following the year that you turn 72, all the money has to come out by the end of the 5th year. And there are no required minimum distributions during the 5-year window. But if that owner dies after the required beginning date, then the RMDs must be taken over the deceased remaining single life expectancy table, referred to as the ghost life rule. And, that payout post-death can't exceed 10 years. So in other words, it has to be completely emptied at the end of a 10-year period. Yeah. So just on the non-designated beneficiary, you can see that it's like, what are they doing here? This is complicated.
Yeah, very complicated.
And guess what? If you don't take out the right amount, you get imposed a 50% excise tax.
Yep.
So that's the government at work for you. This is the biggest money grab I've ever seen, this Secure Act.
By far.
It's a way for the U.S. government to get more money into the Treasury without actually raising taxes. They just changed some rules on what happens on inherited IRAs, which there's trillions of dollars in IRAs that are going to pass to the next generation in the coming years.
Correct.
And this is a way for them to figure out how can we get our hands on more of that money without actually raising the tax rate.
Oh, yeah, by far.
And oddly enough, it was passed with strong bipartisan support.
Yeah, I remember that. It was, a couple days before Christmas in 2019?
Yeah, and there were less than a handful of dissenters.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. All right, so now you got a non-eligible designated beneficiary. So a non-eligible designated beneficiaries are all designated beneficiaries who do not qualify as an eligible designated beneficiary. Examples of that would be grandchildren, older children, or some look-through trusts. So your non-eligible designated beneficiary, the easiest way you can think about this is your children and your grandchildren. So when your children and your grandchildren inherit your IRA, they have to completely empty that IRA within a 10-year period.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not they have to take a required minimum distribution during that 10-year period depends on whether the original IRA owner died prior to or after their required beginning date.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So if they die before the required beginning date, there's no distributions required on an annual basis. It just says that you have to have all the money out before the end of the 10th year.
Yep.
If the person died after their required beginning date, then that non-eligible designated beneficiary has to take an annual RMD and has to have the account completely emptied in the end of the 10-year period.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so who is a eligible designated beneficiary? A surviving spouse.
Yep.
So the surviving spouse can continue to inherit that, and they can continue the RMDs just like they would, but it'll be under the surviving spouse's life expectancy as
Correct.
opposed to the deceased spouse. Minor children of the account owner, but only until age 21, and not grandchildren, right? So can you imagine the normal person in their 70s, they got a child under the age of 21?
No.
No. So this would be for someone who had passed away early.
Right.
It's also available for disabled individuals under strict IRS rules, chronically ill individuals, and individuals who are not more than 10 years younger than the IRA account owner, plus any designated beneficiary, including qualifying trusts who inherited before 2020. The list goes on, and I've got my manual here, so those of you on YouTube can see this, but this entire manual was devoted to the study of the Secure Act with Ed Slott's Elite IRA Advisor Group. And so we spent 3 days this spring dissecting all of the rules under the Secure Act and how the RMDs for all these eligible or non-eligible or whatever kind of beneficiary you're going to call them. But there are some real gotchas in here that aren't even included in the basic simple part of it that I just laid out. And it's terrifying.
Oh, it's what I think what should be scary for the audience is these rules, according to the IRS, that's on them.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's right. On them.
Yeah. Anybody needs some light reading, I got it here for you. But I mean, I put some nice, colorful language on my Post-it notes here. Some of the things as we're going through and studying this, and I can see so many traps for the beneficiaries of retirement accounts that it's going to get messed up, and it's going to cause big distributions. It's going to cause unwanted penalties, unwanted excise tax, and far more of a person's money is going to wind up in the hands of the IRS, and potentially more than what winds up in the hands of who they actually wanted to get the money.
Sadly.
So the bottom line, the moral of the story is here, when you're creating a retirement plan, you better understand required minimum distributions, not only as they apply to you, but you need to understand those required minimum distributions as they apply to your beneficiaries as well.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. Not only from just the pure confusion of the new rules, but looking at it from a long-term planning standpoint, what if your kids are doing better than you are? Now,
that's a good point, Will, because you're right. I mean, so think about the people that are your clients who are inheriting money.
Yeah.
They're in their 50s or their early 60s. They're in their peak earning years.
Exactly.
And their parents are in their 80s and they're passing away. And now they've got these big IRAs that the IRS is saying, you got to get all this money out in 10 years, buddy.
Yep.
And then they're going to stack all that on top of their other income.
Yep.
Now there's a good chance that IRA money comes out at the highest possible tax rate.
Yep. Where mom and dad may have been down in the 12 or 22.
Right. So that's why I love what you did with the Roth conversion and combining that with the QCDs and the donor advised funds, because what you did was effectively for the next generation, you lowered that tax bomb to only $1 million of value there, and you increased the tax-free inheritance to $2.6 million from just over $360,000,
Yep.
and you saved $287,000 throughout the lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an amazing tactic. So again, you just got to understand, make sure it works for your plan. And also, at the end of the day, what are the client goals? I mean, I do have a handful of clients that they want 100% of their money to be in Roth by the time they pass away. So they're actually incurring more taxes right now while they're alive, but doing so knowing.
But they're looking at the longer term impact. They're looking at the generational impact, not just the impact on their lifetime.
Exactly. Yep. They're definitely.
And I think you have to do that. That's only prudent.
It is. And something else, I mean, we need to mention is that those distribution rules for after you pass away, that also applies to the Roth itself.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So there are required minimum distributions. Even though they're not taxable, you still have to take the money out.
Correct.
Right? Because they don't want that Roth getting any bigger than what it already is.
No. They don't want it going in perpetuity.
Yeah. So if you wind up finding yourself as the beneficiary of a retirement account, you need to understand these rules.
Yep.
If you are a person who has IRAs and are planning to leave them to the next generation, you need to understand the planning techniques that are available while you're alive and the impact it can have on your overall financial success, the impact it can have on the overall amount of taxes that you pay through your lifetime, and what your beneficiaries will ultimately pay in taxes.
Correct.
So it really is a retirement savings time bomb.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Right? But you can diffuse it. And that was the whole point of Ed's original book. And I think he did his new one here. He calls it the New Retirement Savings Time Bomb and How to Diffuse It. And this is all around the Secure Act. So, we have a great resource in Ed Slott and Company and the ability to study with him and learn all these things. It's just, and I think the most rewarding part for you and for myself and all of our other certified financial planners here is the ability to pass that knowledge on to the individual so that they can really start to see, okay, this is what financial planning is all about.
Right.
And we're fortunate to have CPAs on staff so that when we're running these projections, our CPAs are looking at them and they're going, yep, that's exactly right. And they may even come up with some other ideas that we as certified financial planners haven't thought of to say, hey, let's do these things. Let's try this technique and that technique. And we can model all those out in the planning software and see what's the best way to do it. And then again, the tax rules are going to change.
Oh yeah, they will.
And so we got to be flexible.
Well, and we already know right now they're going to change in 26 unless Congress does something different.
Right. Yeah, tax rates are going to go up.
Right.
And for most people, pretty significantly. And I think a lot of people, I think that's a good point, Will. People retiring today are looking at the tax rates that they are today, and they're projecting, if they're not using a good financial planner, they're projecting, here's what my income is going to look like net of taxes, and they're not factoring in the huge change that's coming in 2026. That could be a real wake-up call.
Oh, yeah. It could be a big problem for a lot of people that aren't planning appropriately.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully this has helped people with the required minimum distribution. It's complicated. It's critical that you get it right, and it should be looked at, I think, Will, prior to retirement. As you're accumulating money in your 50s, you should be thinking about the RMDs that are going to occur at age 72 because it could help you make a better decision on what kind of tax bucket you're saving into.
Oh, it can. I tell all my clients all the time, you need to be talking to your kids about this. Because if they can set themselves up when they're young, in their 30s or 40s, they're not going to have this giant nightmare when they get to retirement. I mean, perfect example for myself, as I'm building my net worth, all of my money goes in Roth or after tax. The only part I have going tax deferred is our company match in my 401k.
Right.
That way I'm not getting stuck with this whole RMD mess that I have to worry about. And then on top of that, for my kids, I should be able to unwind all of my tax deferred assets before I die, hopefully, and leave them in a better spot.
When are you going to die?
I don't know. It's a good question.
See? I always do that to people. Well, that's going to happen. When are you going to die? No, but the point is there are a lot of unknowns out there, but we always talk in financial planning world about control the things that you can control. You can't control Congress. You can't control interest rates. You can't control the stock market. You can't control foreign powers. There's so much that's beyond your control that people freeze up, they don't act on, and they don't understand that financial planning is all about looking at the things that are within your control and using all those tools and tricks to help shape a much brighter financial future.
Correct. Yeah.
All right.
It's important.
Thanks for being here, Will. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Well, I certainly appreciate you joining us here for another episode of the Guided Retirement Show. As always, if you're watching this on YouTube, we encourage you to give feedback. Check out the show notes where you'll be able to get in contact with one of our certified financial planners should you so choose. And if you're curious about the financial planning software that Will was talking about, you can have access to that same financial planning software where you can start building your plan from the comfort of your own home, and you'll find a link to that in the show notes.
Starting your route to retirement.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to leave a comment and share this episode with your friends.
Investment advisory services offered through Barber Financial Group and SEC registered investment advisor.